We're all familiar with the idea of an after-dinner speaker, but now I'd like to think about the idea of telling stories at dinner time. It's a very natural time for us to want to share stories, particularly those about what has happened to us during the day, and to give us a chance to reflect and to make sense about the various things that have happened to us. And because true life stories, unlike the traditional stories that have been shaped over time and have a natural beginning, once upon a time, and an ending, happily ever after, real life stories don't have that, do they? After all, life is going on, so it becomes very important to decide where do we begin and where do we end a story. What do we leave in and what do we omit? So if you're not careful, when we start telling a story, you might be talking about, we went out and we got to the bus stop and then we waited for a bus to arrive and then we got on the bus. And do we really need this? No. What's exciting, what's interesting in the story is when we got to the wet market and the floor was very slippery and I went there, bang, and ended up falling on my backside. That's the exciting part of the story. So when you tell the story, you are modeling for your children how to share those kinds of stories and to leave out the stuff that's not important in order that what is important will get its fair share of attention and not be lost in amongst all sorts of other things. Often dinner time is a very special meal, isn't it? Either we're celebrating a special occasion, maybe we gather together with friends, our neighbours, and we've come together. And it's natural when we do that to remember the last time that we were together. We've just been through, we had a wonderful reunion here, and all my wife's family came. We had a wonderful day sharing stories and talking about the things that had happened since we last met. And some people we see a little more frequently than others, but some we really hadn't seen since last year. And so it was wonderful to catch up through stories and talk about what we have been doing. Perhaps it might be the food that is the reminder. When was the last time that we had this special dish? And when we do remember that, we'll remember where we were, what was the occasion, and who were the people around us then. Perhaps that will be a chance for us to toast absent friends. And they say, you never really lose somebody as long as you remember them. As long as you keep telling stories about them, they will always be there with you at the table. So dinner time is a very good time for us to be telling stories. It's a time when perhaps, again, there isn't quite the same rush, unlike breakfast time when you need to get off and get on with the day. Now we can afford to take our time over the meal. I remember when my son was 6, 7, maybe 8 years old, one of his favorite phrases was, "Mommy," or "Daddy, tell me a story when you were young." And it really stretched us because my wife and I would have to kind of rack our brains every night to come up with a new story. But he found that fascinating. For example, there was once I told him a story about how I had been caned, yes, caned, when I was probably 12, 13 years old, on the very last night of the Christmas term. At that time I was in England. My father was working here at Salita. And so my parents had done the very British thing, put me in a boarding school. And it was the last night of the Christmas term, and for some reason everybody else in the house had gone off to see a movie, and there were just 3 of us left behind. And left to our own devices, we got into a big water fight. We had these squeegee bottles and water bombs we'd made, and we proceeded to soak ourselves, and I have to say most of the dormitory, with the water. And suddenly, the door opened, and in came our housemaster. And he said, "Merry Christmas, boy!" And he didn't have a chance to finish because the floor was linoleum, very, very slippery with all that water. And he just whip, and he went bang, and landed on his backside. Well, we found that rather funny. Unfortunately, he did not. And he marched all three of us downstairs in our pyjamas, nothing more, and gave each of us thwack, 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 6 of the best, thwack, 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 with a great long cane, probably easily that long. Oh my goodness me, the next day, riding home, 4 hours in the car, it was painful as I kind of rocking from cheek to cheek. Well, my son found that story fascinating. The fact that Daddy had been caned, yeah, Daddy had his naughty side too. This was for him very, very interesting. So when we tell these stories, we're helping to give our children or our guests around the table an insight into our lives and who we are and how we became them. This is a story that really would work very well after dinner. And to tell this story, it's about a girl. I'm going to call just as a name, Charlene, for example. And she was about, I think maybe 4 or 5 years old. And one day, her mummy was at home with Charlene, and she was driving her mummy crazy because I guess it was an e-learning day, no school. And so the girl was running around making all sorts of hullabaloo in the house. And her mum thought, I've got to do something to occupy her. So she said, Charlene, would you like to play a game? And Charlene said, oh yes, please, mummy. What? And her mum said, look, it's like a treasure hunt. Oh, I love treasure hunts. Okay, what am I looking for? And her mum said, I want you to find something that's red, that's round, that's got no windows and doors, and has got a star inside. And Charlene said, okay, red, round, no windows and doors, and a star inside. Okay. So she ran out of the room, and she ran into her bedroom, and she began pulling out all different toys. And she found a red ball, and she thought, oh, wow, it's red, it's round, and there are no windows and doors, but there's no star inside a ball. Whoosh, threw it over her shoulder, boing, 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 boing. And she looked around, she couldn't see anything else. She went into her brother's room, and what did she find? Oh, look, a fire engine. And it's red, but it's not round, and it's sort of got windows and doors, and there's no star. Whoosh, threw that over her shoulder, kabang, 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 kabang. And so it went on. She went through the house, opening drawers, looking here, there, and everywhere, making even more of a hullabaloo and a mess, and her mother's thinking, maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all. And after a while, Charlene suddenly had an idea. She said, I know, I'm going to ask Grandpa. Well, so she went out and she took the lift down to the void deck. And Grandpa was there, and he was playing chess with his Jalankaki there. She asked him, she said, Grandpa, can you help me? And he said, well, what do you need, girl? She said, oh, Grandpa, can you tell me what's red, round, and it's got no windows and doors, and it's got a star inside? And Grandpa said, well, he couldn't think of anything. And Charlene was quite astonished because she thought that Grandpa knew everything. He was so old. And seeing how disappointed she was, Grandpa reached into his pocket and said, go, here you are, here's $1. Why don't you go to the mama shop and see if you can buy some sweets or something? That'll cheer you up. And she said, okay, Grandpa. And she ran off to the shop. Now, when she got there, she went in the door. Right there at the front, they had some fruit, you see, in the little racks. And there was a big Almo lady, and she had a baby propped up on one hip, and she was trying to put the fruit into the basket. And unfortunately, because the baby moved, she dropped the piece, and it rolled onto the floor, and rolled along the floor, and landed at Charlene's feet. Well, Charlene bent it down, picked it up, and she said, here you are. And the woman said, oh, thank you very much. What a nice girl you are. Are you going to have an apple too? And Charlene thought, yeah, actually, an apple sounds rather nice. Better than a sweet, isn't it? I've got to say that because, here you are a parent, and it's a good chance for you to work in a little bit of healthy eating. Doesn't do any harm, does it? So she took the apple, and she paid the woman, and she came home. Well, when she got back to the house, she'd forgotten to bring a key. So she rang ding dong, the doorbell, and she was waiting. And she was feeling a little bit disappointed because the apple was nice, but she hadn't done what her mummy had asked her. She hadn't managed to solve the treasure hunt. But then when the door opened, her mum said, oh, Charlene, aren't you a clever girl? And Charlene said, huh? Why? And Mum said, because you got what I asked you for. Huh? And the Mum said, look, it's red and it's round and there are no windows and doors. And Charlene said, yeah, but there's no star inside an apple. Isn't there? Said her mum. Oh, will you come with me? And she led Charlene into the kitchen. And then she took out a knife and she took the apple and she said, come on, let's see what there is. And she went to cut the apple. But she didn't cut it like this. She cut it like this, from side to side. And she cut all the way through the apple. And when she did, she said, look. Ooh, there's the star. Can you see the star inside the apple? And Charlene said, wow, there really is. And I think people are like that too, aren't they? Yeah? We always look at people in a certain way. But if only we looked at them in another way, maybe we'd see the star inside them too. Please, don't let your children go running around with knives trying to cut open their friends to see if there's a star inside them. That's not the point of this story, okay? It's about trying to look at people in a different way. And now, as time is passing, you can see the star is becoming clearer and clearer. And that's the story of the star in the apple. And you know, the really nice thing about telling stories about food is that when you're finished, you can eat your story. Happy telling. To end this section about telling stories at meal times, can I just share with you from my experience a couple of no-nos and things that you want to avoid. First of all, if you don't want to be telling the story and eating at the same time, because otherwise spit and spit, and that's not a good example, is it, to be sharing with your children. Secondly, at the dinner table, you don't want to be gesticulating too much and doing all sorts of things, because otherwise, whoops, you're going to be knocking the wine up all over people, or, oh dear me, there goes the chili sauce. So keep the gesticulation, gesturing to a minimum. You don't want to be telling a jump story at the mealtime. What's a jump story? Oh, a jump story is the kind of story where, as you're telling the story, usually you get softer and softer, and you're drawing people into the story until suddenly, yeah! And whoa, people do like that, and the next one, whoa! And they've poured all their wine all down their shirts or blouses and so on. So, no jump stories. Nor do I think, do you want to share at the meal table stories of your operations. Oh yes, it was very interesting. So he cut me open, and then he pulled me here, and then they pulled out some of my intestine, and then they kind of sewed it up. And would you like some more liver? No. It's also important, going back to what I was saying about gesticulation, if you're don't be gesticulating with the cutlery as you're going, because otherwise, and I went over there and they went, sorry, eyeball, anyone? Keep your storytelling at the meal table short and simple, because remember, you're not the only storyteller at the table, and other people may have good tales to tell. But do share your stories, be respectful of the space and where you are, and I'm sure people will be very glad to hear the stories you have to share.